What's up, guys? So back with you for Friday, February 7th. Two nice winning days in a row after a bad streak, which basically now means I'm like even on the year again. We still have a lot of work to do here, man. But February, trying to turn it around, having a couple of good days in a row. Last night was pretty sweet. Last night I think it was 6.5 and 1.5, we can call it, because the San Jose game split at the very end of the night, but it was a nice night otherwise. It was 3-1 in college basketball. Drexel, easy win, not really a sweat. Kennesaw State, I mean, they're winning pretty much the whole game. They won, not a sweat. St. Peter's continues to just hate me pretty much, so that game was not even close. That didn't get there, but everything else was good. Unfortunately, for my rooting interests, my Boston Celtics had a terrible game, but I told you that was going to happen. I have a gauge on the Celtics, man. So that Dallas play, I thought it was a great spot to fade the Celtics. Didn't expect them to show up. Anthony Davis did not play, which probably meant that the Celtics took Dallas even a little bit more lightly. And that game actually went up to like 11 and a half, maybe even 12. I forget what number I grabbed. Like, I grabbed the game earlier in the day. It might have been 10.5, something like that. So I didn't expect it to move up that much, but it moved up a little bit with the announcement that AD wasn't going to play. So the books are kind of doing this thing now in the NBA where they're trying to split the difference. So, like, probably if it was announced that he was going to play, you probably would have seen it drop like maybe a point downward. But now it's announced he's not going to play. It moves up a little bit. So the books, when there's that what's the word I'm looking for? When you don't know what's gonna happen, why can't I can't even think in the morning, man. I can't even think of the word that I want. I'm demented now. I'm becoming Joe Biden. No, yeah, like when there's that uncertainty there, the books seem like they'll throw the lineup like in the middle of where it would be if the guy was playing versus if he wasn't playing. So announced he wasn't going to play, and then the line moved up a little bit further, but it didn't even matter, of course. Dallas with an outright win. They won basically wire to wire, I'm pretty sure. Celtics tried to come back, but didn't do it, didn't quite get there. The cover was like never in doubt, not even close. So any of the numbers that you got were good. Of course, that little money line sprinkle that I like to throw on there, which I did, would have been a little bit better if I got the number later, but what can you do? I'm not going to complain about that. Utah Hockey Club tried to make it not happen. Again, they had another game where they outplayed Columbus, I'm pretty sure. If you look at the statistics, they won, but they tried to make it, again, they tried to blow it pretty much. I mean, I think they were winning the game 2-1 later in the game, let it get tied, and then they did actually get out of there with the win. And then San Jose in the night game was the game that I split, but I think it was worthy of the play, man, because San Jose actually outstatted Vancouver in the game, and the game was 0-0. I think it was no score into the third period, which when you have a big underdog, you can't really ask for that much else. And then Vancouver did score, so it looked like it was going to end 1-0 Vancouver, which still would have split my bet because I had the plus 1.5 puck line and the money line. But then San Jose tied it in the final couple of minutes, sent it into overtime, and they wound up losing, I think, in a shootout. I didn't see it. I was already asleep when that happened. But either way, I mean, I got the puck line cover on that and did not hit the money line. I split the bet half and half, so it was actually a slight win because I paid less on the money line portion of it. So fine day. Let's move on to today. We don't have a whole lot going on today. It's Friday. I like Friday because you can focus. We do have a few pretty good basketball games today, though. USC and Purdue is up on Fox Sports at 7 p.m. I'm not going to play this game. I mean, Purdue is a huge favorite, and I mean, rightfully so. They're obviously the better team, and they're at home in an arena where they have a pretty strong home court advantage. Purdue sitting at 13.5. The line really not moving. Not a whole lot going on here. I wouldn't even know what I would want to do with this game. USC, I played against them last game because they had upset Michigan State and played a big game against UCLA the game before that. And they'd pulled off an upset against Nebraska the game before that. So they had a bunch of big games in a row. And then Northwestern really kind of screwed me over in this game, where Northwestern was winning that game the whole way. They were winning by double digits in the final, like, several minutes of the game, and then USC was able to somehow tie the game. Man, that pissed me off, and I wound up getting a push on Northwestern, which I think should have been a win. So now USC is coming off of that. Not a very good performance, but it is a second straight road game. I mean, they're going to try to show up for a game against Purdue. It's just a question of how focused is Purdue going to be, and is USC even good enough to hang here? Purdue, I mean, they're coming off a road win over Iowa. I don't know that that was really like a win that's going to cause them to be in a letdown spot or anything like that. But they do have Michigan, Wisconsin, Michigan State all up next. They do have 3 ranked teams coming up after this. So they may not have total focus on this USC team that isn't really that good. So we'll see what happens. I wouldn't want to lay the points. Purdue, I mean, also, if you're trying to lay the points with them at home, yes, they're the better team in a lot of cases, but they also like to play a really slow tempo. So a lot of times they'll play that slow defensive style and not get over the number, even though they do have a very efficient offense too, despite the limited amount of possessions that they have. So we will see. VCU Dayton, a nice A10 matchup between two of the top teams in the A10. VCU, they're favored on the road, so the odds makers are telling you VCU is the better team. I think both of these teams have kind of been underrated for most of the year. I think VCU is the best team in this conference, and I think Dayton might be second. VCU down from 2.5 to 1.5, so the line is moving towards Dayton. Dayton is the home team here, so it's a close line because Dayton is at home. These teams have not played yet. They play again in the final regular season game. VCU's coming off absolutely blowing out Richmond and LaSalle, who are 2 of the worst teams in the conference. So, I mean, not impressive for them to beat them, but pretty impressive for them to just absolutely annihilate those teams. Now they're going out on the road. I mean, this is going to be a game where both teams are going to be focused. So you got to just kind of figure out like which team is going to be the better like team matchup wise and whatever. And I don't tend to do a whole lot of that, but and it seems like what, my internet's not working? I don't know. Looking at Ken Baum, he's got Dayton down at 76, VCU up in the 40s, I think. So actually in the 30s. So both of these teams like to play really, really slow. Like Dayton plays even slower. Dayton plays ridiculously slow. VCU plays a little bit on the faster side. He's got VCU as a very unlucky team so far, meaning that they're better than they look. Dayton, I think he probably has in the unlucky range as well. No, he actually has them higher in luck index, so I'm kind of surprised by that. He has Dayton as the better offense, but struggles defensively. VCU is the better defense. So, I tend to like defense, but I don't know about this, man. If Dayton is going to slow this down more than what VCU wants it to be, even though Dayton is the luckier team, according to Ken Baum, the line is moving in that direction, and I don't really have a strong reason to disagree with that. So it's kind of the way that I look at that, even though VCU is the better defense. We do have one ranked matchup between number 12, St. John's, number 19, UConn. This is going to be a good one, too. UConn is actually the favorite at home, even though they are the team that's lower ranked, and I don't think they're the better of the two teams, although it is close. UConn's up from 1 to 3, but I think this line's going too far, and it's 3 with juice now, and Ken Baum definitely has St. John's as the better of these two teams. I believe he has this game being a 1-point win for Connecticut, so the line, probably not a lot of line value on UConn. I mean, a lot of times you're not going to find value on UConn just because it is their name. It's UConn. UConn's been hot. I mean, they beat Marquette in their last game, although both of these teams actually did. So UConn's had more time off, but that means they've had more time off to sit and think about that win. But St. John's is lesser removed, fewer days removed from their big win over Marquette a few days ago. So UConn has a little bit of a rest advantage. When you're St. John's, you don't really want to have rest because you've won so many games in a row. St. John's one loss in conference, and they're 20-3 overall, which is insane. Their only loss, a 1-point loss to Creighton on the road. So St. John's has been very good as well, but this could be a game where they do actually lose. It might be a game where the public's going to come in and want to take St. John's, even though it is UConn, just because St. John's has the better record and they're getting points, and they are indeed the better team. But again, I don't think there's that much line value in doing so, so I'm going to skip the game. Both teams are going to show up here. Both teams coming off the game against Marquette, where they both won. UConn's the more rested team, like I said, but again, I think the line's a little bit too far. This is also a huge pacing collision here, where St. John's likes to play really, really fast, even though they do actually play good defense too. So It's very weird. St. John's is the faster team, but they're the way better defense. UConn has been good offensively this year, but their defense has really struggled this year. They're below 100 in Ken Palm's defensive rankings, but UConn is the way slower team, so it's weird. A lot of times you see the slower team be the better defensive team. That is not the case here, but if UConn is able to slow this game to a crawl like they want to do, it'll keep St. John's out of the type of game that they want to play, and it may help UConn win the game. I would not want to lay the points with UConn, though. If you do want the UConn side, I think maybe looking towards a money line might make more sense there, although you're going to pay a little bit more for it now. But that's kind of the way that I look at that. I mean, I'm going to pass on the game, obviously. I'm passing on all of these except for one. Boise State. I'll just mention this because it is a road revenge angle for San Jose State, because Boise State went into San Jose State and beat them there only by 2. I mean, it's not surprising that Boise State beat San Jose State. San Jose State's not very good. Boise State's coming off a win on the road against UNLV, which they're not doing that well this year, but that's still a decent win for Boise, and they do have a huge game up next against San Diego State, and then New Mexico, and then Nevada, and then Utah State. So they have all big games coming up after this, but that next game is also not for 8 days, so they're off tomorrow, and then they don't play again until the following Saturday. So Boise's going to have a lot of time off after this, so I don't know that that means that they're going to really be looking ahead. They might actually still show up and have focus on this game. I would lean to San Jose State just because they are getting a bunch of points, and it is road revenge, but I'm not going to touch this game. It is a second straight road game for San Jose State, which isn't the greatest. Boise's up from 13.5 to 13.5 with juice. So I will pass on that one, but the game I'm not passing on, I'm going to play St. Joe's minus 5.5 here in this A10 matchup on ESPNU and ESPN Plus. This game will be on TV. It's in the night slate here at 9 p.m. And looking at these teams' records, you're thinking, well, wait a minute. St. Joe's has the worst overall record and the worst conference record significantly, and they're favored by 5.5 points. And St. Louis has Robbie Avila, man. They got Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. So what are we doing here? Like, why? How is St. Louis that much of an underdog? And I guess you got to look and just make sure that there aren't any like huge injuries. I know I haven't been paying attention to the injury situations in college basketball. And I know, I forgot to mention San Francisco won for me in the night slate as well to finish off my college basketball slate yesterday. They got an outright win after they were losing for portions of that game, but they made it close at the end and they actually won outright. And San Francisco actually, I believe their best player was not playing in that game last night, and they still did that. So, and I think it was his second game out. So there's that. I don't pay attention to the injuries. It looks like Robbie Avila is not hurt or anything. He was hurt earlier in the season. He's fine. So this is just a legitimate line on St. Joe's, and it's up from 5.5 to 6 now with juice. So if you want to get down on this one, you've got to get this number at below 7, I would say. Ken Palm, I believe, has this being like a 6-point St. Joe's win. So this line is basically accurate. It is where it should be. And I think it's not a great spot for St. Louis necessarily. I mean, they are coming off a win over UMass where they almost lost at UMass, but they're playing on the East Coast here, man, and they're a team from the Midwest, and they were coming off big games against VCU where they won. Then I played Dayton because I thought it was a letdown spot for St. Louis. They lost to Dayton. They went on the road. They almost lost to UMass. UMass was winning that whole game. Now they have a second straight road game on the East Coast against St. Joe's, who, by the way, they already beat at home by 16. So it is a little bit of in-season revenge for St. Joe's, even though not road revenge. St. Louis is actually a 2.5-point favorite in that one, so that's pretty much in line with where the line is here. And St. Louis, after this game, they might not pay attention to St. Joe's that much because St. Joe's is down in the middle of the pack in the conference. And after this, they got George Mason, who's atop the conference right now, even though I don't think they're actually the best team in the conference. And then they got Loyola Chicago, Rhode Island. I mean, those teams are playing okay as well. So I don't know, man. They might overlook this St. Joe's team they already beat pretty easily in a second straight road game. And meanwhile, St. Joe's is coming off a pretty ugly loss, I believe, to, well, not an ugly loss, but they lost to Loyola Chicago. Their losses in conference really have not been that horrible. I mean, they've lost to all good teams. They've lost to St. Louis on the road, Duquesne on the road, VCU at home, Dayton on the road, and Loyola Chicago on the road. So they only have one home loss in conference this year, and it's to the best team in the conference, VCU. So St. Joe's has played a lot of games on the road so far, so they're better than they look right now, man. They faced a very difficult conference schedule so far. They also faced a pretty difficult out-of-conference schedule. They actually beat Texas Tech and Villanova, although we know Villanova is not that good. Lost to Charleston close, Princeton close, Texas they played competitively. They beat Virginia Tech. They actually beat UMass to start conference play. And they lost to Central Connecticut, who actually they're good for the NEC at the very least. So St. Joe's, they haven't faced an easy schedule, we'll say that. And this is a spot where I think they're going to bounce back because they did lose at Loyola Chicago. Even though Loyola Chicago's doing okay, it's not a great loss for them, and it's revenge. So I do think you're going to get focus out of St. Joe's here. And then if you look at what we have for Ken Palm's rankings, he does have St. Joe's in the top 100. He has them 61st in defense, 103rd in tempo, so they like to speed it up a little bit, and he has them at 338th in luck. So he has them as one of the least lucky, 30 or so teams, meaning basically just what I said. They played a pretty difficult schedule, 137th in difficulty overall, and they've played a difficult conference schedule so far, so they may be better than they actually look. They're pretty good defensively. They're not bad on either side of the ball, and they're actually better than St. Louis on both offense and defense, according to Ken Palm. They're better significantly on defense. St. Louis likes to play a little bit slower at 175, so St. Joe's might try to speed them up a little bit. And St. Louis is the more lucky team in Ken Palm's luck index at 159, even though they've faced the 104th strongest schedule. So they've actually faced a pretty strong schedule, but Ken Palm has them a little bit overperforming, and more importantly, he has St. Joe's underperforming a bit, and St. Joe's is the better defense. And I know it's better to take points with the better defense, but I'm laying points with the team that is the better team here in revenge, in what I think is a better spot for them. It looks like the market's agreeing with it. The line looks a little bit misleading on the surface. If you just look at it, you have the team with the lesser record laying points, but I think it's justified. It is warranted. I will lay the points with St. Joe's in that one. Let's go over to the NHL. NHL, we have 5 games today, and these games aren't particularly interesting, really, for the most part. The Islanders have just been hot right now, man, and that's why I'm going to talk about them, just because they're kind of on fire right now. They're coming off a win over Vegas, so they did not really slow down, even though they lost that game in there to Florida, but they've continued their winning ways. They got a nice win over Vegas, and now they're starting a road trip. So even though you could maybe argue that it's a letdown spot on the surface, but you're really going to have a letdown when you're playing Winnipeg, who's one of the best teams in hockey, and it's the start of a road trip, so you want to get the road trip off on the right foot. I think it is a focus spot for the Islanders. I'm not sure that it's not a focus spot for Winnipeg either, as they don't really have anything coming up next. So they are coming off a win over Carolina. They actually beat Washington in overtime to finish their road trip, returned home, and I thought it was not the greatest spot for Winnipeg there. I'm actually glad that I held off of that game, and Winnipeg actually didn't play Hellebuck in the game, so they played their lesser goalie, Comrie. So I'm glad that I didn't play Carolina, though, just because somehow it looked like it was an advantage for Carolina. I mean, you had Winnipeg's backup goalie in there, and Winnipeg still won 3-0. So I'm glad I did not try to play Carolina in that one. But now that means Winnipeg is coming off a big game. So I actually think the spot is a little bit better for the Islanders here. But the money is coming in on Winnipeg. They're up from -180 to -190. 73% of the cash on them and 71% of tickets on the Islanders. The Islanders getting public action now. Doesn't seem like that would be the case. Doesn't totally make sense to me, but I'm just going to stay off the game. Chicago and Nashville. I mean, this is a game. These teams definitely don't like each other. It's kind of a rivalry. Chicago's coming off a big game against Edmonton where they actually returned home and had a few days off in there. They weren't going to be unfocused against Edmonton, though. You got to think they would not be. And they lost for a second straight time. They lost at home 4-3 to Edmonton, this time in overtime. So now Chicago's coming off that really difficult game. They did lose at Nashville 3-2 in a shootout last time, which I believe I was on Chicago in that game. And they screwed me, of course. But in this game, I would lean the other way. I mean, Chicago coming off that tough game against Edmonton. I don't love it. Nashville's coming off an ugly loss to Ottawa, and they've lost 5 games in a row now. So you got to think that getting away from home, having 3 days off, that's got to help them as they get to just not listen to what the press is saying, get out of there, go on the road for a game, forget about it. Having a bunch of days off when you're on a loss streak can actually be helpful to you because it can break that losing momentum there. So Nashville could be in a bit of the better spot here, but Nashville's been kind of untrustworthy this year. As we know, their odds makers keep telling you that they're way better than they look, and it just doesn't really come to fruition that often. Nashville's a minus 193 favorite on the road, down from minus 195. So that's the odds makers are telling you they're the way better team here, which is crazy. Chicago, obviously not a good team, but Nashville with that ugly record is laying a price like that on the road. I'm not going to do it. Even though I do lean to the Nashville side, that is a pricey, that is a high price tag, man. I'm not doing it. 54% of tickets, 91% of the cash on Chicago. So the cash looks like it is on Chicago, but I won't play it. Colorado, Edmonton, I mean, these last two games are big. I'm not playing any of the NHL games today, but Colorado, they're coming off another win. They beat Calgary last night, so they're playing a third game in 4 days now, all in different cities. So not an easy spot for them, really. And it's a fourth and 6 days, all in different cities as well. Not a great travel spot for Colorado. And I thought yesterday might be the game that they overlook because they had Edmonton up today, but they did not. They beat Calgary anyway. Edmonton coming off that overtime win over Chicago, 2 overtime wins on the road at St. Louis and Chicago. They're playing a third game in 4 days in different cities as well. So the scheduling spot is worse for Colorado, I would say, but it's not good for either team. Edmonton's returning home from a road trip, although they were only on the road for a couple of days. So not really like a huge road trip return where they're going to be massively distracted, especially when they're playing a good team like Colorado. They did beat Colorado on the road, though, on January 16th. So could be a game where maybe Colorado will be a little bit extra focused just because it's a little bit of quick road revenge there. But I don't think that Edmonton's going to overlook them because it is Colorado, and they're going to have a huge break after this, which is probably the All-Star break or whatever, which is long. It's like 2 weeks. We're going to have 2 weeks of no hockey, which maybe will help me get right because my hockey hasn't been that great, although I was fine last night in hockey. But so I don't know. All that being said, I mean, I think I would have to slightly lean to Edmonton and just lean where the market is headed. Edmonton up from minus 160 to minus 190, though. So if you do like Edmonton, you missed out on the better prices there. Colorado, 55% of tickets, 58% of the cash, but it looks like they may be shaping up to be a little bit of a public underdog there, which you tend to not want to be on. So I'm not playing the game. I don't have a good read on that game at all. And then we got Dallas. Let me see. Dallas and LA. This is a big game as well. Dallas just lost at Anaheim, and they're not traveling far. They have 2 days off, and they're only going up the road from Anaheim to LA. So I think you're going to get a focused effort out of Dallas here. I think they just overlooked Anaheim completely, and I think you lose when you're a good team like Dallas and you lose to a bad team like Anaheim. I think that is going to serve to refocus you. And again, they might have just been looking ahead to LA anyway. So I think that's the situation here. So I kind of like Dallas being in a bounce-back spot here. LA, they returned home from a long road trip, and I thought it was a bad spot for them. They had multiple days off in there, but they still beat Montreal 6-3 in, again, what I would think it would be a bad spot generally when you return home from a road trip like that. When they're out on the East Coast, they came back home facing a team that's not that good with a much better team up next. Looked like a bad spot, but Montreal still didn't play that well. LA beat them easily. So now they're coming off of that after beating Carolina, so they didn't suffer the letdown there. They're going to show up because it is Dallas, but I think Dallas is going to be in a little bit more of the focused mood here. So I would have a slight lean to Dallas. But it looks like the market is indicating on LA, and I'm not really sure I agree with that. LA up from minus 106 to minus 108. So odds makers are telling you Dallas is the better team because LA is not getting a full home ice here on the price. But minus 106 up to minus 108, 62% of tickets, 89% of the cash. So they are getting the cash, it looks like, and it is moving up on them, but I'm not sure that I would agree with that one. Moving over to the NBA, though, where I do have two plays. We got a Friday NBA card here. It's not a huge card for a Friday night. Some of these games I just don't even really think most of these games are not even interesting. Let's just talk about both of my plays, and then I'll be done for the morning here. I'm going to be on Brooklyn +7 and all these ugly games, man. I mean, you have just ugly, ugly games. And, well, I mean, all right, before I go to Brooklyn, all right, the least ugly game, Milwaukee and Atlanta are at least two competitive teams. I mean, that's the best NBA game. Usually you get a much better NBA Friday slate than this, man. Milwaukee broke their loss streak by beating Charlotte, so that might help give them some momentum here. When you're on a bad loss streak like that, a good thing is to beat a bad team, and then you just end that loss streak, and you get a little bit of confidence going forward. Milwaukee, I mean, I don't know. You got to look at the injury report for Milwaukee, too, because they have guys that are just resting in random games. And I think, did they trade away Middleton as well? I think they might have. So they got Lillard, Giannis, and Brook Lopez are all listed as game time decisions tonight. So you got to make sure those guys, whether those guys are playing or not. I believe they did trade Middleton, but I'm not even sure. So, again, you got to just look at what the personnel is here. And then Atlanta is coming off a loss to San Antonio, and that was San Antonio's first game with De'Aaron Fox. So San Antonio actually looked like they were going to cover in that game the whole time. They didn't cover, even though they still won. Atlanta's been on a bad streak, man. They lost 8 games in a row, finally beat Detroit, and then they lost again to San Antonio. So they're playing pretty bad basketball right now. And you got to look at their injury report as well. I don't know what's going on. The Bucks are up from 5.5 to 7 with juice as a road favorite. 64% of tickets, 75% of the cash. So looking at the what's going on in the market, it looks like the market is indicating on the Bucks in this one. Trae Young is also a game time decision. We've had some injuries on the Hawks. Capella's been out. It looks like he might come back tomorrow. I don't know what's going to happen here, man. The Bucks, if those guys are playing, they have the more intact team, I guess, and the better roster. Odds makers are telling you that the way better team is they're laying points on the road. But is that line a little bit too high based on recency because the Hawks have been so bad recently? Possibly. I mean, the Hawks are coming off that tough loss. The Bucks probably in a better spot, really, because they are coming off that win that will give you like a new momentum over an easy team to beat in the Charlotte Hornets. So I do agree with the market in this one slightly. Do lean to the Bucks. That's not a play. As I said, my first play, even though it looks ugly as hell, is the Brooklyn Nets. The Heat are actually down from 7 to 6 on this one now. So if you can still find a 7, obviously that's what you want to do. I mean, I probably would still play this at lower than 7, even though, as I always say, 7 is a key number in basketball because it is the 3-score threshold where teams stop intentionally fouling. Heat have 64% of the tickets on them, so they are public, even though we know that they don't have Jimmy Butler anymore. Jimmy Butler wasn't even playing for them, so that's not really going to be much of a change. And actually, once they traded Butler, I think that probably was helpful to them because now they don't have that like cloud hanging over them. They don't have that question mark anymore. Like, is Butler coming back? Is he going to play? Now the answer is no. He's not on the team anymore. So now you can just get back to business. So I actually think that helps like alleviate a distraction more so, but I just don't like the spot for the Heat here. 83% of the cash coming in on the Nets, so it looks like huge market indicators on the Nets, and I'm agreeing with this. Looks like reverse line movement against a public Heat team. I mean, the public, nobody's going to want to touch the Brooklyn Nets. They're not very good, but I mean, they're not the worst team in the NBA at the very least, and Miami, I mean, they're on a nice little mini run right now, really, winning, 4 of their last 6 games, and they just beat Philadelphia, and now they're finishing a road trip. They're already 2-1 on this road trip. They're playing a 3rd game in 4 days and a 4th game in 6 days on the road trip, all in different cities, so not the easiest travel spot, but, I mean, it's not too far from Philadelphia to Brooklyn, but still, they're kind of traveling all over the place. Beating Philadelphia is good in that Philadelphia does have like most of their key players back. So that is a pretty big win over Philadelphia, who's trying to make a late playoff run. Now they get Brooklyn, who, by the way, they already beat Brooklyn in the same venue at the Barclays Center by almost double digits, by 9 points back on January 25th. So Miami already beat Brooklyn here pretty easily recently. And who does Miami have up next? Oh, yeah, they have Boston, and then Oklahoma City, and then Dallas. They have 3 giant games up after this, man, against Boston, Oklahoma City, Dallas. Huge games. So I think they could easily overlook this Brooklyn team for all those reasons. I think it's a sandwich spot, sandwiched in between all better teams that have way superior star talent. They already beat this Brooklyn team not that long ago, so it's a little bit of a quick revenge spot for Brooklyn. And for Brooklyn, they just lost to the worst team in the NBA, man. They just lost to Washington. They'd won 3 games in a row before that, including 2 over Houston. So I think it was a little bit of a letdown spot, and they were in a back-to-back coming off sweeping Houston. A lot of times when an inferior team pulls off back-to-back upsets over the same team like that in a home and home, a lot of times you want to look to fade that team in the next game. That was a bad spot for Brooklyn. Now they're not traveling. They're staying at home, and they have a day off. I think it's a bounce-back spot for Brooklyn. I think they're going to be definitely focused on Miami coming in there, especially because they lost when Miami came in here last time. Brooklyn was playing some awful basketball for a while, but the fact that they won those 3 games in a row shows that they're still trying to win these games. And I think they're going to be embarrassed losing to Washington by 17 points on their own floor, man. That just doesn't, that's not something that should happen. Washington, like I said, they're the worst team in the NBA, and losing to them by 17 on your own floor, you can't let that stand. So Brooklyn is the play in this one. You're getting a generous amount of points in that one as well. Brooklyn +7, 6.5, whatever it might be. And then my final play is I'm going to lay the points with Philadelphia. I know I'm going against my boys, Detroit, who have been good to me the last few years, especially 2 years ago and this year. They've been very good to me as underdogs, but this is a spot where I like the 76ers side in this one. I mean, the Sixers are trying to make this late playoff run. The line looks a little bit weird, kind of, because the Sixers have a bad record still. But they're actually, the Pistons are actually not very good at home. They're only 12-13 at home, so they are not an insurmountable home team at all. The Pistons do a lot of their damage actually as like road underdogs when teams overlook them more. So they haven't been that great at home, haven't had that great a home court advantage. But looking at their records, you think, well, wait a minute, the Sixers have the worst records. So how are they laying 3.5? Although I think a lot of people know the answer to that. It's because the Sixers were playing as an injured team for most of the season, but now they're not injured. They got basically everybody back right now, I'm pretty sure, except Drummond hasn't come back yet. He's a game-time decision tonight, so we'll see if he plays. But if he does, I don't really think it's a reverse injured player spot or something, because he's not like the key player there. The Sixers have Joel Embiid. He missed the last game, which was like injury management. They rested him due to his knee, but I think he is going to play in this one. I think they were just resting him for a game. That would be my assumption, especially based on this line. It's making it look like Joel Embiid must be playing in this game. Paul George is there, and Tyrese Maxey is there, so all their players are there. And if Drummond comes back, I'm fine with that too. I mean, I don't think that's going to hurt Philadelphia when it's not like the keyest component in your lineup coming back. It's not going to like hurt your momentum that much. Philly just lost to Miami, so they're coming off a loss. So they could be in a little bit of a bounce-back mode, losing to that Butler-less Miami team. And now Philly is starting a road trip, man. So they had a bad homestand for the last portions of it, but they lost to Denver and Boston in close games. I mean, you're not going to blame them for those losses. I mean, those are good teams. They beat Dallas barely in a game where I actually played Dallas because I didn't like the spot for the Sixers after blowing that lead against Boston, where they had Boston on the ropes. I thought it was going to be really difficult for them to get back up off the mat, and they still won against Dallas. Then they lost. They were in a back-to-back in a third game in 4 days, and they lost to Miami. It was not a very good spot for them, but this is a much better spot in my opinion, even though, yes, I know it is a third game in 4 days, but it's the start of a road trip. And when you're starting a road trip and you just lost your last home game, you lost 3 of your last 4 home games, I don't think you're going to overlook whoever it is that you're playing first, even though I know Milwaukee is a bigger game up next, but I don't think they're going to overlook this first game of the road trip, man. Again, you lost 3 of your last 4 at home. You get to go out on the road and get out of those distractions. Philadelphia is a crazy sports city, although, of course, they're all talking about the Eagles right now in the Super Bowl. But so that might even anger Philly, the Sixers a little bit too. Like, we're the team that's being overlooked here. Like, they're not talking about us. They're talking about the Eagles. So all of that, I think, is good. They get out of there, not listen to the media talking about the Eagles or talking about how much the Sixers suck. Just get away from all those distractions. Go on the road. It's a good spot to refocus. So I like the spot for Philly, and I don't like the spot for Detroit. Detroit just lost on a buzzer beater to the Cleveland Cavs, man. I played Detroit in that game plus the points because Cleveland was off that huge game against Boston where Boston was able to get the win. Huge game for both teams there, so I faded both Cleveland and Boston off of that game, and they both of those bets won for me. Detroit is now the team that's in the bad spot, though. So they're not playing the third game in 4 days. I know they're not traveling, but still, That was a huge game against Cleveland. They almost pulled that off. They had a lead at one point later in the game. The game was tied, man. It was going into overtime, and Garland hit like a 30-foot shot at the end of the game at the buzzer to end the game in regulation. Brutal. Detroit almost was able to beat the team with the best record in the conference, and I think maybe the best record in the NBA. So that was a huge game for Detroit. Now they got Philadelphia coming in. I mean, yeah, Philadelphia does have the stars on their team now, but coming off that game against Cleveland, I just think it is not a good spot for Detroit. I'm going to play the Sixers for all those reasons, and the market is indicating on them. The line's moving again, man. It's up from 3 to 4 with juice. I saw this line all over the place this morning. I saw it anywhere from 3.5 to 4 with juice. So get what you can on this, but I like the Sixers side. 64% of tickets, 70% of the cash on them. So even though they look a little bit public, because the public does like that star power at the very least, I don't think they're necessarily that much of a public favorite because it looks like more of the cash is coming in on them and the line is moving that way. And that's going to do it, man. That's my analysis for today. My plays today, short Friday card, St. Joe's -5.5 in college basketball, Brooklyn Nets +7 in NBA, and also in NBA, Philadelphia 76ers -3.5. That's going to do it. Tower Gang Toad on Twitter. Follow the Tower Gang Podcast, the most offensive podcast out there, baby. Patreon.com/Tower Gang. You get bonus content, live pre-show, post-show. Have fun with it, man. Let's have fun tonight. Let's get a third straight winning day in a row, man. That would be excellent because we got to get back with it, man. I'm basically even on the year again now after last night being pretty awesome and the night before that not being too bad either. So let's get back to it, man. That's going to do it. Thanks for hanging out with me, and peace.